Thanks, Ciarán Comhairle. I think that state-led strategic development is the only way forward for any society that wants to advance itself. And I think when we look back at our history and some of the initiatives that were taken by this state in the early years and in the 30s, when resources were far less than what we have now, and the vision that people in Ireland had at that time, when we should be really embarrassed at what we're putting forward now. Because in the 30s we had the development of a national airline, transatlantic flights, the idea of picking a place like Shannon and having that as a focal point for regional development, unlike what it is now, a US military airbase with nothing happening in it. We had the electrification of the country, where the semi-state ESB linked up with Siemens in Germany, and the talk at the time was that they were so visionary in the amount of output that they were going to challenge, that people were going to be fried in their beds. There was so much electricity going to happen. But look where that put us, and look at that vision compared to what we have now, because the reality is that Project 2040 is just a rehash and a repackaging of all of the other plans and announcements that we've had over the past period. And when we look at things like regional development and we see how Dublin is grinding to a halt because of the lack of a national plan, I don't see the solutions to that crisis in anything in this plan. And I just want to use one example in relation to that, and it's in relation to Metro North, because it's something, I suppose, close to me. But by my count, and I have lost count, I'd say this is at least the 6th time over 17 years that Metro North has now been announced as some part of a capital or strategic plan. I remember when it was first announced, it was around the time my daughter started in primary school, and it was supposed to be finished by the time she started in secondary school. I said, that's great, it'll be nice now going into town, 22 minutes from Swords and all that. She's now in college in the Netherlands, and she's never going to see that. But actually in the Netherlands, where I've been over to visit her, the trains come at 42 minutes past the hour, and they depart the next one at 43 minutes or 13 minutes. They have an absolutely integrated and powerful transport system. But Metro North has been announced and announced and announced, and nothing has been delivered. And I mean, we have to make that point, because capital projects really are, I suppose, a record are so abysmal that I honestly think if the plan had announced kind of that we were going to have the world's biggest skyscraper in Athlone, or a space station in Killybegs or whatever, nobody would have even batted an eyelid, because we're used to these plans where actually the plan is announced but nothing really happens after that. And let's remind ourselves, because back in 2005, the then government published a 10-year plan for Transport 21. And I'm reading it again, and we did in preparation for this. It was just, whether you'd laugh or cry, I don't know. But Metro North was supposed to be completed by 2012. It's 2018, and it hasn't even been designed yet. The joining of the Tallaght and Sandyford Lewis lines in the city centre was supposed to have happened by 2008. Also in 2008, we were supposed to have a Lewis extension to Tallaght, to City West, a Cork commuter rail service to Middleton, an Ennis to Athenry rail line, and, I'm not making this up, a rail station in Stephen's Green that was going to be to Dublin what Grand Central was to New York. And all of that was supposed to happen in 2008. That was Transport 21, which promised us Metro West, which was supposed to be operational by 2012. The Lewis being extended all the way to Bray, trains that ran from Dublin to Dunboyne and Navan, a rail service from Ennis all the way to Knock. We'd have boldly new DART services from the city centre to Hazelhatch and Kildare, Balbriggan on the Northern Line, Maynooth, and all of the Dublin rail lines that I've mentioned were announced again in the NTA strategy and the Greater Dublin Strategy 2016 to 2035, and we have them here again in this one. And the main thing about all of these projects and what they all have in common is that none of them ever happened, and none of them even broke ground. So let's bear that in mind when we look at Project 2040. It's a piece of paper and a lot of stuff in it, and I'm not being negative about this, but experience has taught us it's not going to happen. The maps with the new rail lines for Dublin are the same as the ones that were in Transport 21 13 years ago. We're told there's capital commitments in this one. Well, there was capital commitments in the last one as well. So, I mean, where are we going with a lot of this? I mean, we don't have the time to develop it, but I mean, we do have to put that in its absolute context, because a lot of money has been expended, but nothing really has been delivered in many of these cases. And it's not just Fine Gael, Labour, Fianna Fáil, the Independent Alliance, the Greens, PDs have all been involved in government during these times, but certainly from a Metro North point of view, nothing has been delivered as of yet. And I think when we look at transport in terms of Project 2040, I do think the government has kind of given up entirely on the concept of sustainable regional public transport in favour of roads, roads and more roads, even though we are heading towards climate catastrophe. National roads, ring roads, motorways, bypasses, we've got them all. They're all in this, but the 15-year-old Transport 21, which was drawn up before the Paris Climate Agreement, had at least some plans for regional railways, but this plan is really weak in regards to that, and I think that's incredibly wrong in terms of a backward step in terms of sustainable transport. I think it's important to say as well, I mean, the plan talks airily about supporting a sustainable and economically efficient agricultural sector. It doesn't mention the fact that Foodwise 2025 and Food Harvest 2020 are both actually predicated on increasing agricultural output with the attendant increase in carbon emissions. Sustainable in this context really has nothing to do with climate and everything to do with profit. I'm very concerned about the fact that the document gets really excited about data centres, talking about them being international digital infrastructure, but nothing in the plan that says how are we going to mitigate against the humongous energy demands and emissions that these data centres are going to bring. We're told they'll underpin Ireland's international position as a location for ICT. I mean, let's get real here. Data centres are server warehouses, nothing more. I mean, it's like saying, you know, that a car parts warehouse on the Long Mile Road is going to underpin Ireland's position as a location for car manufacturing. It's absolute and utter nonsense. This is not part of our silicon future. Actually, it's going to put a huge drain on our natural energy. And, you know, at full capacity, the first phase of the Athenry plant is going to hoover up some 30 megawatts of power, the same power as 26,000 homes. Over time, this is going to rise to 240 megawatts, and that's one data centre. Absolutely frightening stuff. So I don't have time to develop the points, but this is plan heavy on spin, very little on detail.